We won't go through all of the formalities that went through last week, but just for those people that may be watching this in a recording later, I'm Dave Thompson. I'm the Director of Education here at the Academy of Cleaning Excellence. My co-host today is Daryl Hicks. He's coming to us from St. Louis. Hello, Daryl.
Hello, Dave. Happy President's Day. Hopefully you got some presidents in your wallet and not George Washington. So happy President's Day. Hopefully you got some Ben Franklins.
Well, I'm not sure. I have to go and dig in my wallet there, Daryl. Wasn't ready for that one.
You get it back from your wife.
Yeah, well, let's not go into that. This is a public show. All right, so we went over pages. Let me look at this just a minute here. We went through page 26 in your handbook last week. So we're going to pick up on page 27. And just so that you can note it, we're going to go through page 42 today. That's the second module. So what we're starting on today is processing. And if we've got this just going right today, Daryl, I think this is where we're going to pick up today.
Sure, Dave. It's, what's being done right now. And if you have a green program that, you're trying to limit the amount, we talked a little bit last time about the hazardous chemicals that we use in the cleaning and disinfection of our facilities. And, but hopefully, if we are using safe chemicals, then we have, our goal is to protect the health of not only the building occupants, but also our staff. But whenever these outbreaks come along, like, when we have a lot of influenza, I think hospitals are pretty full right now with influenza patients. I know that influenza right now is widespread in 48 states. And so we have some of those people are hospitalized. Even in schools, you hear about schools closing down because of low attendance, and then they break with the green protocol and then think that they've got to go to the most toxic chemicals. And one of those, all those toxic chemicals are also hazardous to the health of those who are applying them. So, I think that bleach is one of the go-tos whenever, I hear about a school closing down and super cleaning the facility. I just envision, dumping bleach on everything.
Well, and Daryl, I think that's your point here as we start this section this afternoon. It's why is it that whenever there seems to be something that we should be fighting on a day-to-day basis, all of a sudden, because somebody else knew about it, because an influx of this came in, we all of a sudden grab all of these bottles of all of these things that we don't normally have, and let's just dump tons of it on the surfaces and forget what is our standard operating procedure. I think in the book here it says, cleaning is the first line of defense in infection prevention. And we have to understand that this is something we do on a day-to-day basis. If we're doing our day-to-day cleaning and our day-to-day program processing, as Daryl says all the time, we don't have to all of a sudden do something different because our protocol should already be there. So I think this is what you're talking about, Daryl. We are the first line of defense, correct?
Correct. And, people think that, it's the medicine and the doctors, the professionals, quote unquote, that are the first line of defense. But those doctors will tell you that, they can only do so much. And with influenza, it's a virus and they don't have any antibiotics for it. All they can do is treat the symptoms. And so, killing pathogens, it's not difficult. If you read the labels on your disinfectants, there's probably influenza A and B listed on that label, hopefully. And influenza A is the most prevalent influenza bug out there. And what doctors can't do by prescribing antibiotics, we can do in our profession, in our role, by killing it on the surfaces. And so we don't have to go to drastic measures to kill pathogens. And, you know, there's a whole hierarchy of pathogens, and influenza is one of the lowest, easiest to kill if you have the right protocols, the right processes, and the right chemicals, and trained staff. So you have a video for us to watch?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing about it is as Daryl says here, if we just have everything in place, and this is a video, it's a little bit blurry, one that was done numbers of years ago, but just shows how we need to look at this and what we need to think about before we start talking about going in and processing these certain surfaces.
This is Arizona's best Fox 10 News at 9.
How safe are school bathrooms? Wait until you hear what the Fox 10 investigators found. The story next, only on Fox. Only on Fox. How safe is it for your kids to use their school restrooms?
The Fox 10 investigators go undercover to find out what may be lurking in those bathrooms, and what we found may surprise you. Here's Rob Piercy.
Would be affected by
going to school. Ask most kids and they'll probably tell you recess on the playground is their favorite. And the most feared? Well, you guessed it. But as we found out in a Fox 10 undercover investigation, the scariest place of all may be the school restroom. The Fox 10 investigators went undercover at schools in 3 different districts: Scottsdale, Kyrene, and Paradise Valley. We took swabs of various bathroom surfaces, including floors, flushing handles, and soap dispensers. We then took our samples and turned them over to Scott Farrell at Lab Express for testing.
The first test that we did is it's a urine test.
They also tested for blood. A few weeks later, we got the results. Blood tests came back negative, but the urine tests, that's a different story. At the school in the Kyrene district and the one in Scottsdale, every surface tested positive for urine. That includes the sinks, the soap dispensers, the hand dryers, and the doors.
That's an indication that bacteria and viruses could have also traveled as well.
Dr. Will Humble is with Arizona's Department of Health Services. While he says urine itself is fairly harmless, finding it in so many places can be an indication of more harmful things, like E. coli, hepatitis A, and this time of year, the flu.
Because it can be really dangerous, especially for kids with asthma and so forth.
Officials at both the Kyrene and Scottsdale school districts declined on-camera interviews for this story, but they did fax us these written statements. From the Kyrene school district, school bathrooms are cleaned thoroughly every evening. We do not have the financial resources to employ staff at each school to clean our bathrooms during the school day. Of course, if there is an urgent need to provide custodial services in a school bathroom at any point during the day, a member of the staff will ensure that these services are provided. And from the Scottsdale School District, we have no reported cases of children becoming sick because of an unclean bathroom. As any parent can tell you, some splatters are to be expected with young children, and we do our best to keep school bathrooms as clean as possible. Dr. Humble agrees it's unreasonable to believe every bathroom surface at a school would be urine-free, but says
it's surprising if it were in the beginning of the day. In other words, I would expect every single surface in a public restroom to have a little bit of urine on it by the end of the day.
In fact, our samples from the Kyrene and Scottsdale district were collected in the morning.
Which brings us to the final district we tested, Paradise Valley.
Of the 5 places we swabbed, only 2 came up positive for urine. The floor in front of the toilet and the door leaving the bathroom. And here, keep in mind, we tested in the afternoon.
In this particular district, we have about 5 million square feet of building space and about 750 acres of grounds to take care of.
Dr. Skip Brown is Assistant Superintendent of School Services for Paradise Valley.
In the last 2 years, we spent about $2 million renovating the restrooms to make sure they're top-notch.
That includes lining the bathrooms with all non-porous surfaces, making them easier to clean. And then there's this, a super cleaning machine called a Kivac. Once a week, contract custodians use it to clean the bathrooms floor to ceiling. This may very well be the reason our test showed the school in Paradise Valley to be the cleanest.
As far as health and safety, it's got to be a zero defects environment.
The man behind our tests agrees.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what's the sense of washing your hands and then going and touching a dirty door handle after on the way out?
But filthy or not, health experts say your kids shouldn't avoid washing their hands, even if the bathroom they're using is dirty.
That would be absolutely the wrong thing to do, is to discourage kids from using the soap and using the dispensers and stuff and washing their hands at school.
Rob Piercy, Fox 10 News.
Well, before Daryl starts, because I saw him smiling there, and I know he's got a number of things to say about this, let me tell you, we're not here trying to promote the Kaivac machine that you saw being used. However, what we are trying to talk to you about is that there's a standard operating process that needs to be employed when we're cleaning anything. And we're just talking about restrooms in this video here, because there's a number of these surfaces we're going to talk about here in a moment. But I just want you to understand, we're not trying to promote any one thing. Now, if you were coming here to one of the Academy classes, you'd actually see us using hand sprayers instead of trigger sprayers to mimic what you saw in the no-touch system. So, Daryl, I know you were smiling there. I know you've got some things to say about that video.
Well, mainly that things do travel, and they travel on air currents. And so the fact that urine was tested on all those surfaces in the first two schools and not in the third school is that, in the third school was tested in the afternoon. The other two, where there was so much urine all over the place, it's indicative that they don't have the right process, or you don't know what the story is. Maybe they don't have the proper number of staff. Maybe they don't give them the right training, the right education about their role. And so that's why it's elementary to me that we educate our staff so that they know what their role is, and at the end of the day, and that is to leave the place cleaner. It's really about kind of emptying the garbage, and we take the garbage out when we do the proper processes and have the right amount of time to do the job.
So what you're talking about, Daryl, you're talking about taking the garbage off of the fomites. Now, if you've never heard the word fomite, you see it up there on the screen. This is by and large what you saw these people in the video doing. They were cleaning fomites. So what is a fomite? Well, it's the doorknobs, light switches, any hard surface that can transport these diseases or these pathogens from one place to the other. We call them touch points. Now, I mean, I cannot give you a full list of all these touch points, but these are hard, inanimate surfaces, a bed rail, a telephone, privacy curtain, computer keyboards, your phone, the mouse on your phone. You know what I'm talking about. All of these things, and it's all these things that you and I are touching with our hands, and we are the agent that is moving these pathogens from fomite to fomite. Now, the reason that you hear Daryl and I like to say these words is because we want people to pay attention to us. And if I just say I'm cleaning the telephone, well, nobody really thinks anything about that. But if you say, my job is to process the fomites, I can guarantee you, somebody's going to look at you and go, what? And that's our whole point. We want them to respect what you're doing and add value to it. And if we don't talk differently, we won't get that value back. Daryl, you want to add anything before I go on?
Yeah, because I think one of the biggest fomites is not it's an inanimate object, but it does travel, and that is dust. And so dust is not animated surface, like vectors are, humans, animals, birds, poultry, chickens and turkeys and birds, migratory birds all carry things that, wind up being the influenza that goes around the world. But anyway, dust is not a vector because it's not a living, breathing object, but it does travel. And, just like the lab coats that those humans wear, going from room to room, and the neckties on the doctors and the stethoscopes that they use going from room to room. Those are all fomites, but they do travel.
Well, you're talking about those items, our clothing, like you said, the stethoscope, our mop, our broom, our dustpan, our cleaning cart. Those are fomites. But most of these fomites are contaminated by the vectors, where the vectors are what is carrying these microbes from place to place. They live either inside or on us as humans or a living, breathing thing. So you have to think about this. Microbes are a living thing. They can be a vector as well. So whether it be pets, whether it be, and this is why you hear people say, don't let your pets sleep on your bed with you. I'm just sorry. I know we all like to have this, and we all have them, but you've got to think about this. So understand there's two things you're dealing with. We have the fomites, which are the inanimate hard objects, or maybe even soft ones. And then you have the living, breathing things that by and large, except for what Daryl mentioned, dust, these are the things that move the pathogens around from place to place. And you saw that in your book. This was on page 27. And if you flip this over, we're going to talk now about one of Daryl's favorite things, and that's a CEST person. Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, in order for infection prevention to be a viable program, you need certified environmental services technicians. And what is that technician given? They're well trained, and Dave and I don't like the word training, because I think a lot of times people intend it to be education. And so you'll see educated about the prevention and transmission of disease down there at the bottom. But once you have that, then you have to do the training. Here's how you do things in a systematic, from the cleanest surfaces to the dirtiest surfaces. And so you don't go in and clean the bathroom and then come out and wipe the patient's overbed table. That's going from the dirtiest to the cleanest. So you have to think about how you're moving things around that room, and you can't use, the training would entail, cleaning top, from the top down, and because of gravity, if you high dust the top of the TV, then if there's dust up there, then it falls to the floor, and then you can remove that dust once it hits the floor, with your mopping techniques. But anyway, it is a systematic, that's where the training comes in, and the how to do things. And then they need to be equipped with the necessary tools to clean, sanitize, and disinfect. And there's different operations there. Cleaning and sanitizing is different than cleaning and disinfecting. And they need to be given the proper amount of time to do their task. Many EVS departments are working shorthanded. I think a survey recently was that EVS departments were working between 5 and 10 FTEs below where they ought to be, because hospitals keep expanding and taking on new services. And with a shortened length of stay in hospitals, that means more room turnover. And EVS departments are working under a lot of stress with staffing. And so if it's going to be completed appropriately, then there has to be the right amount of time for them to do their jobs. And then we have to be able to measure cleaning. And that's the ATP that we talked about last week. It could be using fluorescent markers, but we have to be able to validate that the cleaning process is taking place as it should.
Well, and that goes to exactly what you're saying, Daryl, is that our whole purpose of being here, of doing it, is not to go through the motions. It's not just to say I did the job. It's to actually keep that environment inside that facility truly safe. And this is what we're talking about, keeping that environment truly healthy and clean, and that's by what you were just talking about, the measuring devices. We'll talk more about those as we go. I just wanted to, at this point, go over to page 29, if you will, in your book. It says the basic principles of cleaning. Now, as long as I've been doing this, it's hard for everybody to go, oh, I do this and I do that and I do this. And we get into this whole routine about all the things we do. Well, really, there's only actually two basic principles in all cleaning. And we just want you to understand that they are pH and physical removal. Now, what you saw in a little bit of that video was a no-touch cleaning machine. They are a very prime example of the two principles being used. Anything that is liquid has a pH. Don't care what it is, it always has a pH. And in order to complete the cleaning process, whether it be sanitizing or disinfecting, as Daryl said, we have to have the physical removal. Not in here anywhere does it say kill, destroy, eradicate. And I think this is what we want to try to make a point of as we talk about this CEST course, is that yes, we have certain areas we do that, but by and large, most of what we do is simply using pH and physical removal to remove the food sources so the microbes can't live. We'll go into that more, but as we do that, I want you to understand that the very universal cleaning agent is water. Water is a chemical compound. So you may have heard these things such as people say, chemical-free cleaning. Well, I have a little bit of a problem with that because water is a chemical compound. Two cells of hydrogen, one of oxygen, and this is our universal cleaning agent. That product has a pH. We'll get into pHs more as we go into it, but it has to be neutral. This is what water is. So I carry this little pH paper with me everywhere I go. I don't know how many people do. I know I taught some classes last week, and they'd never seen this before, and these gentlemen have been in the industry for 30 years. Daryl, I'm sorry about that. I didn't tell you I was going to say that, did I?
Dave, I always have a say that, you know, someone that's been working in the same department for 10 years, they can have 10 years of experience, or they can have 1 year of experience repeated 10 times.
Well, I'm sorry to say, but there's a lot of people who've never learned this. And so it's very often that what you'll see me do in most any one of my classes where there's a liquid, I always test that pH. I never trust what is on a label, what is there, because in the real world, when it comes to my exposure to a product, I want to know what that exposure is. And this is one of those quick and easy ways to make sure that I am being protected and that the people that I'm providing services for are as well. So I would maybe say, if you can't get one, get hold of me and I'll help you get one of these. But carry it around, make sure that you test your surfaces. Now here's two examples of no-touch cleaning. You see the one, let's see, I'm not sure it'd be on your left or your right, the one in the yellow. Gentleman's working down through a hall in a retirement center, long-term care, and he's simply spraying the product on and then he's going to vacuum it up. Here you see me demonstrating a no-touch system of a different sort, but in both of these we're applying the product to the surfaces so that we can get the dwell time, and then in both cases we're vacuuming that product up along with all the contaminants, the bio loads and everything else. So this is what I was trying to say is the best example of pH and physical removal. Daryl, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a plug for infection prevention for dummies, but in my book, I say that washing or scrubbing a surface physically removes soil and organic material such as blood and body fluids and takes with it many germs. So if you can remove 99 to 99.9% of the soil from a surface, then with that soil goes the bad guys. And so when you talk about vacuuming, it's the use of a squeegee. And, you know, Dave, I know you love squeegees. And, because it does a much better job than a mop or a cleaning cloth. But we have to physically scrub, or in this case, with the pressure of these machines, you're spraying the cleaning chemicals on there, but then part of that is the physical removal, which could involve, even lower or medium pressure. But that physical removal of the soil, it either winds up going down the drain in that restroom, or it gets squeegeed and vacuumed up. And so you saw the one school district there who had only 2 surfaces out of that entire restroom that were found to have urine on them. And, they were using this system of soil removal. The company comes in once a week. I mean, once a week is, I think, minimal to do this process that you see Dave doing there.
Well, one of the things I teach here in my restroom cleaning class is that there's many different ways that I can apply the product to these smooth, flat surfaces. But as Daryl said, I'm a very big proponent of squeegees. You might go to our YouTube channel at the Academy of Cleaning Excellence. You can see a video of me, actually, the second part of this one right here, where instead of using a rag on these smooth surfaces, I actually use a window squeegee and squeegee all of that down to the floor. So there's one thing a squeegee does, and you see this on your car windows, the very cars that we all drive. A squeegee goes like this, and everything's gone. There's nothing left. Anytime that you use a rag and you wipe that surface, there's a film left, and that film has something in it.
Yep.
The squeegee doesn't do that. So by and large, use a squeegee here everywhere that you can on your flat surfaces, like the urinal partition. You can use on a lot of surfaces. And then we use a squeegee on the end of a vacuum. Now, I don't want to go too long into this. We've got a lot to cover this afternoon, but there is a lot of microbial life on these surfaces. And the whole thing that Daryl and I are saying here is that all bacteria, good and bad, has to have several things: food, moisture, and oxygen. And our job, by and large, is to remove those sources so the bacteria can't live. Because just as soon as you and I get through doing that restroom, we get through wiping down that doorknob, we get through taking care of that telephone or that bedside tray, well, here comes along a fomite, a vector touching that fomite, and here we have a bioload again. So our job is to just simply keep up with what the vectors keep transporting these pathogenic organisms to these fomites, keep these fomites as surface clean, and remove as much as we possibly can. Anything before I show this video, Daryl?
Well, I think one of the things that you need to realize that, we're not going to get these surfaces sterile. Sterile means no growth, no new growth of bacteria, but our goal is to reduce it to a safe level. But just to give you a perspective on this, one bacterium left undisturbed on that surface within 5 hours becomes 1 million. And so in a very relatively short period of time, that surface is repopulated by the bacteria that we do not remove through our processes. So, the process is essential, and, I think that we have, something like that in this video. So let's look at it.
Earth, the home of humankind for eons. Humans have adapted well on planet Earth. We're the dominant species. We've conquered the wild beasts, built incredible dwelling places, cities, countries. We've even touched other planets. Yet the greatest threat to survival is so small that it's invisible to the naked eye, an enemy that is relentless and even changes its tactics, even its very form. There's a definite connection between human health and soil removal, and it's clear that most restrooms today pose a very real threat.
Now, I don't want to play this whole video. We'll play more of it for you. I can send you the link to it if you'd like. But what you can see very quickly and easily there is the vector that went in carried 2 foam mites. The foam mites dropped on the floor, another foam mite, and now we have a contagious illness that caused the kid to be sick. It doesn't matter what the person is, it doesn't matter what the foam mite is. This is how easy it is. And if there was anything that I can say that is the best example of pH and physical removal, it's exactly what you see on the screen here. There is no better example of simply using soap, water, and physical removal. Now, I know there's always that debate. Do I use hand towels? Do I use a dryer? I'm not going to get into that today. I think, Daryl, you'll agree with me that this is still, always has been, and probably always will be, the best example of pH and physical removal.
Yeah, and why is it that we talk about washing hands as an acceptable method of reducing pathogens on our skin, but yet we don't talk about cleaning surfaces in the same way? You know, you have the same elements. You have water. You know, Dave talked about water being the universal carrier of cleaning. And so you've got water, you've got the chemical, which in this case is soap, but in other cases it's, you know, general purpose cleaner. Dave, you got something?
Daryl, I got to interrupt you just a moment. Sheldon sent me a message wanting to go wash our hands right now.
Well, you'll want to. It was the best advice your mother ever gave you, was wash your hands. So
apparently we've made our point to some extent right here.
I saw you had a phone message that you wanted to share, but you have time, you know, that proper hand washing takes about 20 seconds, 15 to 20 seconds. So the way you do that is sing the happy birthday song a couple times and you get your 15 to 20 seconds. I see guys, after they use the restroom, they go over and run water on their hands and then they're reaching for the towel. No soap, no time, nothing. So you have to have time, soap and water, and, you know, do a thorough clean between your hands, your fingers, and even up to your wrists. A lot of times when hands are tested, they find out that this part of the hand between the thumb and forefinger, you know, is one place that gets missed, and especially wrist and underneath your rings if you wear rings. But alcohol-based sanitizers, you know, are good up to a point, but after you use those for 5 to 7 times, you need to stop and wash your hands.
Now, Daryl, just because I need to explain this, folks, is alcohol-based sanitizers do not belong in a restroom. They are only to be used when soap and water is not available. So I think that we also need to debunk that thing, oh, we have to have it everywhere. No, no, no. Alcohol-based sanitizers, or any sanitizers for that matter for the hands, alcohol-based or not, only if you don't have soap and water.
And we're reaching a dangerous point right now, Dave. Just recently in the news was that hospital sinks, especially those in patient care rooms, you know, patient rooms or in the patient's bedside, they have bacteria that grows in the biofilm down in the pipes. And then, you know, through the splashing of water, those bacteria wind up on those horizontal surfaces around the sink, could be on the handles. But anyway, they're talking about getting rid of sinks in patient rooms, which I think is a disaster waiting to happen, because people need to wash their hands. And that is the, you know, washing your hands and doing it appropriately, or using alcohol-based hand sanitizers, are considered to be equivalent of one of each other. But, you know, you need to wash your hands, as Dave said. You know, you just cannot depend on alcohol-based hand sanitizers.
Well, I think this goes back to what we're seeing right here. You know, not always do we have visible soil on our hand. but if we have contact with another fomite, we're going to move that across to them. And, you know, if we didn't have soap and water, how many times would you use that alcohol-based sanitizer? As it said, 5 to 7 times. And then we've got to go and get soap and water. And I don't think that a lot of people recognize the fact, you know, I'm not a real proponent of alcohol-based sanitizer simply because mentally we think that replaces the
right,
and it doesn't replace, it just augments it.
right. And I think that you know, the takeaway from this segment is that we have to have clean hands touching clean surfaces, and it's hands and those fomites that you know, you got the vector and fomite right there together. You know, hands and clean surfaces.
Well, that's why we put gloves on, and that is there's just simply no replacement for good hand hygiene. Gloves are only good for, I saw this number 70–80%. I'm not sure where we got that from.
It's, you know, these exam gloves, you know, if they're latex exam gloves, they have tiny holes in them, and a bacteria, you know, 10 bacteria could go through one of the holes in these latex exam gloves. So if that is what you're giving your staff to wear in the cleaning procedures, then, you know, you're not protecting them. You need to use, I think we talked about last week, but nitrile gloves, and Dave says it goes up past the wrist. They need to have a longer cuff on them. But we'll get into that when we get into the isolation paraphernalia.
So we don't want to have nails. We want to keep our nails trimmed. You know, artificial nails are just something that's another place for bacteria to grow and pathogens to breed. We don't clean well in that area. So, I mean, this is just another one of those things. You got to think about this, folks. Your hands are one of the largest transporters of pathogens that there is. Now, there's all kinds of other ways, but this is primarily how we still find it today, no matter how much we've talked about it. And I know right now you're going, wait a minute, what are they talking? Because this still is what we don't do. And as Daryl said, we see people go into the restroom and use a facility. I see people that are here in class and we touch all these things and machines, and then they just grab their lunch. It's just the human factor of habits, and this is what we've got to talk about. So, Daryl, I think there's two things that probably most people in healthcare are very interested in, and that's when we start talking about things. You've got a very wealth of knowledge here, so I'm going to let you take this away.
Yeah, in the course of your cleaning of patient rooms or even a doctor's office, sometimes it can happen, especially, you know, with doctors seeing patients, you know, that aren't sure, you know, exactly what they have, and, you know, so they come into the doctor's office and then go directly to the hospital because they have something that's contagious. And, but you should be notified, you know, in that doctor's office instance, you should have a communication method of, you know, letting your staff know that that exam room and the waiting room all need to be, you know, treated as isolation protocols call for. So, you know, I think this is a step that a lot of people miss, is washing your hands before and after, not just patient care, but your staff before they go into to even put their gloves on. They need to wash their hands or use the alcohol-based hand sanitizer. But, you know, the isolation precautions, you know, that one is non-negotiable, washing your hands before and after. But, you know, each one of these would have a check mark by them, you know, if you need to wear mask, whatever. But anyway, the need for any type of isolation gown selected is based on the nature of the patient interaction. We're not doing patient interactions. We are going in there and cleaning, processing this room And in the course of that process, you may dislodge soil. Hopefully you do. And if it's not all collected, it could wind up on your uniform. So you need to not just look at this patient interaction as being the reason for wearing isolation gowns, but you will come into contact with infectious material and you don't want to wear that home. So wear the isolation gown to provide that barrier between you and the soil. And people say, well, you know, I've got a lab coat on, or I've got my warm-up jacket on, and so that's all the barrier that I need. Again, that is a soft surface that will wind up collecting those pathogens. And, you know, I've seen pictures of healthcare workers riding, you know, like mass transit, and, you know, the nurse assistant is sitting there and no one will sit next to her because they don't know what she has been exposed to during the course of her job. And then workers that, you know, I know nurses that told me that, you know, when they got home, they started stripping as they came in the door and walked, you know, their uniform right to the washing machine so that they wouldn't contaminate anything in their home or their children. So those lab coats and jackets are not isolation paraphernalia. Standard precautions we've talked about, you treat every surface as if it could be contaminated, and that way you'll never have to wonder what was on that surface. If you treat them all, it's kind of like a gun. You know, if you always treat a gun as if it was loaded, then you'll have no surprises. And that's the way we do with standard precautions. But when that isn't enough and there's actually isolation, then we need to wear the right PPE. So there we have to, you know, we talk about donning, and as putting on both gown and gloves upon room entry, and that will be indicated on that isolation sign that you saw earlier. There'll be a checked box there, and you need to train your staff to actually look at and follow those precautions that are posted on that sign. Clean gowns used for isolation are not sterile gowns. They, you know, you wouldn't wear it into surgery to do an operation. Those gowns are sterile, but these gowns that we use out in clean isolation rooms are not sterile. And those isolation gowns are always worn in conjunction with other PPE, gloves, and you know, if goggles are indicated, but we're going to talk about that next. Gowns are the first piece that you put on, and full coverage of the arms, the body, front, and from neck all the way to mid-thigh. Exposed under upper body areas are protected. I think you got the next one, Dave. Yeah, should be removed before leaving the room. Don't wear that gown out into the hallway because you're taking contamination with you. If you're going down the hallway to get something, then you need to leave the isolation gown in the room so you're not carrying that contamination out into public areas. You need to remove it in a manner that doesn't contaminate your skin. The outer or contaminated side of the gown is turned inward and rolled into a bundle, and then discard in the waste container in the room. So here's the personal protective equipment beyond the isolation gown. We have protection for eyes. This could be in the form of goggles or safety glasses. I think that, you know, here, eyeglasses, people say, well, I can't wear goggles and my eyeglasses because I need my glasses to see, so this is all I need. No, it's not. OSHA would not consider that to be eye protection. It is for vision, and if you have employees who who can't see without their glasses, then there are other alternatives, and we'll talk about those. So if you don't need your glasses to see with, then you should be wearing goggles. And this is as much a, here's the requirements for those goggles. You see the side shields there so that nothing can be splashed up the, if you're cleaning processing a toilet and the liquid from the cleaning cloth flips up in the air, then it could get into your eyes. So it's not just because of the isolation room, but I believe that these should be worn by all employees, because I couldn't tell you how many times we had employees who splashed a chemical in their eye just in the course of doing their job. So the role of goggles, in addition to mask, is preventing exposure to infectious agents, but it's also, it's for those exposures that may happen during the course of processing that room. But I thought we had one, Dave. The next one no. So if you have to wear glasses, then, to see with, then this is the next option for those people who can't wear the goggles that you provide for them. They will need a shield, face shield. You see that it covers, other areas that even if you had a mask and goggles on, that there are other skin areas on your face that could be exposed to splashes. So that's why you should wear one that covers your forehead all the way down to your chin and wrap around the side of the face, so that you don't get splashes of blood or chemicals on your skin. Here you see I don't know why two guys are wearing all the PPE and one isn't. I question, what's going on here, but I guess.
Darryl, if I can, Darryl, this is an instructional class
Oh.
on how to don and doff PPE. And while you may not see, but there was a number of different things. The reason I chose this picture is you see that in this one here, they went to the extent of the gloves that come up over, they've taped these down, they're wearing a mask, they're wearing the shield, they're wearing the hood.
Hair cover, yeah.
This is completely to the nth degree, if there was, and I think this would be the case of a severe isolation issue. And I think this doctor was explaining here, this is what we need to go to some extent. We're just I wanted to use this one to kind of show you the full extent of what was needed in some cases.
Yeah, I believe this was probably in training people with the Ebola scare that we had about 5 years ago. But yeah, they had to, they had to do exactly what these people are doing. But even some of the nurses that wound up being exposed to the Ebola through the blood of the patient got it around their neck, and I don't see that those did that good a job of covering, from their the line of their uniform up to their chin. So, even in that case, I think that they had the hoods that went around their complete head. But anyway, we have here examples of the mask and these earpieces, headband, are used to secure the mask to your head. And the front of the mask and those the goggles are all contaminated if there's any sort of splash of blood or body fluids. And it's only those straps or those ties that are not considered contaminated. So the front of that mask is contaminated.
I thought it was also interesting here, Darryl, when I was searching for pictures for our class for this today, is the many different ways that masks were put on. And you have the two different examples here, one with the elastic and one with the ties. And if you notice how the one with the ties, one goes down and one goes up. And I think that was an interesting thing that I found in the research.
That's the proper way to do it.
How many times have you seen people not do it that way? The mask was not securely fit, and so therefore the mask simply wasn't doing the job. So
Correct.
Here again, it's just like everything else we do. It's how we go about applying this PPE that really does make it work appropriately. So
I think if you trained your staff to do it the way the lady there at the bottom is doing it, then you'll set yourself aside as a professional. Well, we talked about masks, protecting the employee from infectious material, but sometimes in hospitals you will see patients wearing masks, and it's because they're immunocompromised. They're on some sort of chemotherapy, and so they can't be exposed to airborne pathogens. And so you'll see sometimes patients wearing masks, but it's the same principle, that it's protecting that patient, or in our case, protecting the staff. And here we have the N95 mask. Dave, if you zoom in on that, but this is the next level up from just a standard surgical mask that you saw previously, but this is for particulate matter. And originally these were designed for staff who were treating patients with tuberculosis. But during swine flu a few years ago, bird flu, there was a shortage of these N95 masks because they found that the virus of bird flu or swine flu was so small that it was going through those surgical masks. So this is the preferred mask, and so these are not necessarily disposable. They do filter out those tiny virus particles. And so you have the N95 and the other one that's there. But these, would be issued to employees, and we issued them, and employees had a case that they kept those in, and whenever it called for N95 masks, because these are expensive, when you consider the cost of that surgical mask or an N95 mask. The N95 is probably 100 times more expensive than that surgical mask. So you don't want to just throw them away. You can reuse them over and over again as long as they're not contaminated on the outside.
Well, I think what you also find is that, when you see face shields used, there is a lot of times that you're going to see other eye protection, different types of masks, as Daryl said, maybe not just our standard particulate mask. Maybe we went through an N95. Daryl, did you see most of the time if they were using the higher grade particulate filter mask that they're also going to be using the face shield and they're going to be in an isolation gown as well?
No, I didn't see the face shields very often unless it was either in surgery where, the risk of splashes of blood and body fluids could be greater, or if it's a procedure where they're changing, something that could wind up being a blood exposure. But mask and eye protection is pretty standard. Face shields would only be worn by those people that have prescription eyewear that they need to be able to see what they're doing, which I prefer that they see what they're doing.
And I want to ask this question because this was asked to me not by our students today, but by another student. I wanted to ask, since I had you here with me today, whenever somebody's going through and they're picking up the hazmat, what I call hazmat, the bloodborne pathogen bags, those red bio bags, there's a lot of times that is definitely going to have the potential, anyway, to have a bloodborne exposure. Would that be a recommended time to wear a face shield when you're taking these bags and taking them out of their cans and stuff?
Yeah, especially if they have liquid regulated waste, medical waste, which would be suction canisters. And a lot of times those suction canisters may have 5 different ports on the top of it that, you know, someone is supposed to put the cap on those. And if they don't do that, or if they don't have the lid screwed on tightly, then there could be liquid waste in those red bags. And so there would be a potential exposure. So I would recommend that they wear a face shield, but a minimum would be a mask and goggles, because I've had more than one instance of an employee getting splashed for blood in red bags.
Now, I know that we're spending quite a bit of time on this mask issue, but we really wanted to get across today the fact that the little white particulate mask, or the 2 disposable ones that you saw there, these are not respirators. These are particulate. These filter the airborne particulate. Respirators are a totally different thing. And as you see here, this is that droplet nuclei, that very small stuff that Daryl mentioned again before. And that's when these things have to be exact, because this proper seal, I know that we keep talking about this, Daryl, but if they don't, if the user doesn't perform that fit check and make sure that that fits on their nose properly, I don't care what mask it is, it didn't work.
Right. And having been in the Army before, and having gone through the tear gas chamber, and having to put on a mask, it is essential that you make sure that that seal is there. And guys like me and Dave, we wouldn't be able to wear the old Army issued gas mask because of the facial hair that we have. And same way with these, that, you know, to get a proper seal, you can't have facial hair or it's not going to seal. But yeah, it's essential that, you know, you suck in, you know, once you form that, that metal thing across the bridge of your nose, and make sure it fits tight. You exhale, you know, to make sure that, you know, it clears it, and then you inhale and make sure that it kind of sucks into your face, and that's how you know you have a good seal.
Now, whenever I was looking for items and pictures to go with this process today, folks, I couldn't help but using this one, because I know that what this lady has is not an aerosol, but understand that a lot of times when you're taking a trigger sprayer and you're spraying that product out through a trigger sprayer, it is coming out at such a fine mist that it's now aerosolized, and it's very, very possible that you're breathing and inhaling this. So Daryl and I, we have not saying that respirators shouldn't be used, but if you use the chemicals in the way that we teach, you wouldn't have this problem either. But we'll get to that one later on in the class. Don't give it out right now, Daryl. We'll talk about that later. We're talking about respirators now.
Yeah, and for tuberculosis, which is an airborne disease and very communicable, means it's easily communicated between patient and the staff. You know, that's tuberculosis. And so you have to have the right mask to filter that out. I said this earlier, but as long as they're not damaged or soiled, you should be able to reuse them, and they should be issued, and, you know, staff have a case that they put those back in and then bring them out whenever the isolation calls for it. So donning means to put on or dress in. So it's not a guy named Don, but it is putting on isolation gowns. And here we have, you know, they put ties on these things for a reason, but I see doctors, I see nursing staff walk around the hospital and they don't tie the back at all. And so it's hanging loose around their neck. And as they bend forward, you can see that, you know, their whole midsection is exposed. So if you put on the gown the right way, then this is the first step, is putting on the gown. Next is the mask or the particulate respirator. Place the mask over the nose, mouth, and chin, and then there's a metal band in there, fit it across the bridge of your nose, and then put those ties around, and there you have the young lady that is doing it the right way. For a respirator, you need to perform a seal check, inhale, and it should collapse. That white mask is sometimes called a duck mask for whatever reason, but anyway, these are not N95, but they are particulate respirators. After the mask, then you would have the goggles and or the face shield placed over the mask. You see why you have to put the mask on first in order to put on the goggles or the face shield. Gloves are last, and you know, here we have gloves that fit up over the cuff of the isolation gown. I think that is essential, and the reason that it goes over is that if there's anything that gets splashed up on the wrist, it doesn't go underneath. You know, these are gloves that Dave was talking about. They're long enough to go up over the cuff of your isolation gown. Doffing is removing, taking off that contaminated PPE. So think about it being contaminated and how that we need to protect our skin from contamination. So the outside of those gloves is contaminated. You grasp, you know, without sticking your finger down in the cuff, you just grasp that the top of that glove. You pull it forward so that that glove is turned inside out, so that this is the clean surface. Dave, go back there to the previous one. No, the previous picture. No, go back to gloves. Okay, the third picture is what I wanted to.
There we are.
There. That is the clean side that is to the out. So the contamination is inside that glove. You ball it up with the other one, and here's where you stick your clean hand, your uncontaminated hand, into the top of the contaminated glove. Pull it forward so that as you're holding the contaminated glove, you turn it inside out, and you've got two gloves inside that glove, and that gets dropped into to the waste.
And don't forget to wash your hands after you've done this.
Good point. Don't assume anything.
Correct.
Gowns, you know, the front of the gown is the most contaminated. You unfasten those ties, pull away from your neck and shoulders, touching the inside of the gown only. Do not, you know, remember you've got clean hands now that you have washed, so you don't want to contaminate those hands. Turn the gown inside out, fold or roll it, and discard in the proper waste container. We've already talked about this, but you know, the front of that mask is, or goggles is contaminated, so you handle it by the straps or the headband earpieces to pull it away from your face. And if it's disposable, not an N95 mask, then you know it goes in the trash.
So what we've got here is a short video of this being done. As you can see, we pull things from the internet just like everybody else does. So here's kind of an example of this as Daryl and I talk through it. We won't.
Personal protective equipment should be selected based upon proximity to the patient and the likelihood of contact with any blood or body fluids during procedures in the patient care area. This video will demonstrate the proper sequence for donning and doffing personal protective equipment from the Centers for Disease Control. The first step in donning personal protective equipment is good hand hygiene. The second step of the procedure is donning the gown. The gown should be fastened at the back of the neck and the waist by tying a bow. The third step is the selection of respiratory protection. One option might be a procedure mask. Procedure masks are used for droplet precautions. Droplet precautions are used in the care of patients with influenza. To apply this mask, gently crease the metal insert to create an indentation for your nose. Then cuff the elastic bands around your ears and spread the mask to cover your face from the bridge of your nose to below the chin. Finally, ensure the mask is snug and comfortable on your face. Procedure masks also come with attached eye protection. This mask is applied in a similar fashion. Respirators act as a filter to prevent small particles from entering the airway of the person wearing them. A respirator should be fit tested annually in order to ensure a good seal. The properly sized respirator should always be used. Place the respirator on your face and position the straps at the back of the head and at the base of the neck. The elastic straps should be in contact with the skin on your neck, so remove any hair that is in the way. Press the mask along the edges to seal it to your skin. Finally, breathe deeply in and out, feeling for any areas where air may be escaping along the edges. Respirators can be shaped to fit the face or be folded. Folded respirators are applied in a similar fashion, ensuring that the respirator is fully unfolded and has a tight seal with the skin. Care to the patient. Is doffing the gloves. Gloves are removed first because they are likely the dirtiest item and are contaminated on the external surfaces. Grasp the first glove.
I would recommend that you find your own. Maybe you already have one of your own. If not, you certainly can use the one that we've used here. There's all kinds of them out there on the internet to find. Just make sure that you listen to what Daryl and I have talked to you about today, because this is your own personal protection that we're talking about. You're the external person in that facility, and as far as the EVS department, and maintaining a healthy atmosphere for everybody. Daryl, I think we want to finish this up today. We're at about a little over an hour and 10 minutes now. We want to make sure that we catch our hour and a half, and we should be on schedule, because we're talking about some bloodborne pathogens. And I don't think that everybody is always totally aware of what really a bloodborne pathogen is and what we really need to do to protect ourselves.
Right. This, by its very nature, OSHA is all about employee protection. And that's why sometimes they and CDC don't always agree. But, you know, when we're talking about meeting the OSHA compliance standards, you know, this 29 CFR 1910-1030 is probably, Dave, 40 years old now. And that really ages me, but I can remember when this came out, what a big deal it was, because at that time, HIV and AIDS was the pathogen of greatest concern, and that healthcare workers were being exposed to the blood of some of these patients that were showing up in hospitals. And so, you know, and the other thing was the needles that were washing up on shores up in New Jersey, where medical waste was being dumped at sea. And these needles, sharps, were, you know, contaminated with HIV. You know, they were drug users. And so there was a great emphasis on protecting employees who work in healthcare, and rightfully so. But those exposures can come through reasonably anticipate, and then they, you know, we're one of the job roles that OSHA really wants to zone in on, because by the very nature of our job roles, we are exposing our staff to these exposures to, you know, through the skin, the eye, mucous membranes, or your nose, your mouth. So there you have, and then the parenteral exposure to blood, which would be through, you know, a needle stick. OSHA requires the use. Now, this is something that you need to take note of, because they require you use an EPA-registered tuberculocidal disinfectant, or a 1 to 10 mixture of bleach and water. But all, you know, both of those are the acceptable disinfectants for cleaning blood and body, you know, spills of blood. Now, people say, I've got a disinfectant that says it's effective against HIV and hepatitis B, and OSHA says that's not good enough, because there are other bloodborne pathogens that are more virulent, much stronger, and can affect the health of the workers, other than HIV and hepatitis B. So unless you're cleaning up a lab that's strictly dealing with hepatitis B research, then you don't know what's in that blood. So OSHA says, unless you know what's in the blood, then you need to take it to the next higher level, and you have to have a tuberculocidal disinfectant. So we're going to talk about small, minor blood spots and spills. You know, don the personal protective equipment, especially gloves. You apply the tuberculocidal disinfectant mixed appropriately over the blood and potentially infectious material. Let that work a little bit, and then you wipe it up with a disposable paper towel, something of that nature, and then that needs to go into a red bag and disposed of as medical contaminated waste. And then after you do that, then you apply the disinfectant a second time onto that, you know, decontaminated spot, and you do the final disinfection. The first one was just basically to remove it, but this is actually disinfecting it, then dispose of those gloves following that policy that we showed you earlier about how to take those gloves off, and wash your hands thoroughly. Major blood spills on carpet areas. This is always a big bugaboo of mine, is that you cannot clean up major blood spills on carpet, but on hard surface floors we can, and we're going to talk about how to do that. We're talking about porous or semi-porous surface cleaning and deodorizing. That's not right. I'm
well,
not.
We didn't have a lot added in there. We were supposed to ad-lib that there.
Okay, I'm sorry, but porous and semi-porous surfaces, you cannot, you know, back up to the carpet, because I think that this is a misnomer. And you know, if you have a major blood spill on carpet, you just call in the carpeting company, and even they have to know what it is, and they have to wear the proper PPE to take up that carpet. So if you have a,
We do, Daryl, we do have protocols here on page 38 and on page 39 for
Yeah.
carpet and hard floors. Because, you know, people are not going to do what we've asked in this area. So, you know, you do need to have some kind of a protocol that you can look for. The thing is because of time and everything, we just felt like, you know, for the most part, read what we have written here in the material. You'll also find on page 41, you'll find the reusable tools and equipment for this, carpet upholstery wands, all of these things. You know, we just didn't want to spend a lot of your time going through what you can certainly read in these last pages, because everybody's going to use a little bit of different protocol. And so while we wrote that in the book for you to have, it's simply guidelines. You need to look at your protocols. You need to have some. And I think that's the main thing we want to say here in this last part. When it comes to a blood-borne pathogen cleanup, the thing that you need to have is a protocol in place that everybody is aware of, and that there's no, well, I don't know what to do here and I don't know what to do here. We should have this itemized. And here's the thing, practice it. Go and throw some red fruit juice down and say, okay, here's what you need to do. Show me that. Because when it comes time to put on the proper PPE, when it comes time to do the blood-borne pathogen cleanup, we need to have that as a habit, not as, well, I need to go back to the book and I need to find out what I do. It needs to be a habit. Because I think, Daryl, excuse me. I think you said some time ago that a lady almost died from Ebola because she didn't de-gown absolutely correctly.
Right.
And I think this is the thing here. Practice what your PPE is and your procedures. Don't wait for it to happen.
Yeah, and don't say, well, I'll do it the right way wherever it's really important. It's important every time, and you need to realize that. And as Dave said, don't just assume that because you showed it to them one time that, you know, they got it. You need to drill it into them, and it should be first nature, not second nature, because when the regulators come calling, they'll quiz your staff about it. What do you do about blood cleanup? So I think that's it. Thank you, and stick around for a minute or two and answer any questions that you all might have.
Okay, so there is a question from New Mexico. Question on crusted blood. Dried blood cleanup procedures. Is there a protocol on how to handle that?
You handle it just the same way we do if it was liquid, because the definition of regulated waste is even if it's crusted on a surface, that once that crust gets broken, then it still carries the same pathogens. They never were killed. And so you need to treat that just as you would a liquid spill.
Okay, Edgar's sending a message saying that he's okay with everything. So, Daryl, I want to thank you again for your time this afternoon. Wait a minute. Do you wet first so it doesn't become airborne dust?
Yes. Just do it the same way that we showed you earlier, is to squeeze out your disinfectant on that crusted, dried blood, let it sit for a sec, and you know, pick it up with a paper towel, and then, you know, throw that in the red bag, and then go about disinfecting that surface.
He says, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. See you all next time.